What is inflation? Truth versus omission. Omission by intent equals intent to defraud. November 15th, 2004, by Mitchell, Vexler. Education is power, and in this case, knowledge is about keeping your money in your pocket. I have stated that in my humble opinion, the Federal Reserve should have the doors permanently chained shut. The reasons for this opinion are stated in this article. Interestingly, there is a direct correlation between the inflation created by the Federal Reserve and the inflation fraudulently created by the central appraisal districts, which should also have their doors permanently chained shut. Let's start with the question, what is inflation? My straight, clear, irrefutable answer is, inflation occurs when money is spent by a government that is not backed by a physical asset. Paper chasing paper is not an asset. It is financial engineering, more than likely for a nefarious purpose. The economist Milton Friedman, who received the 1976 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for his research in consumption analysis, stated that inflation is caused by too much money chasing after too few goods. He died in 2006, yet his understanding carries more weight today than it did because the evidence of its meaning is so much more evident and looms larger, like the sword of Damocles. Milton Friedman also had many great quotes, including, "If you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there would be a shortage of sand." A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. The essential notion of a capitalist society is voluntary cooperation and voluntary exchange. The essential notion of a socialist society is force. Government has 3 primary functions. It should provide for a military defense of a nation. It should enforce contracts between individuals. It should protect citizens from crimes against themselves or their property. When government, in pursuit of good intentions, tries to rearrange the economy, legislate morality, or help special interests, the costs come in inefficiency, lack of motivation, loss of freedom. Government should be a referee, not an active player. The economic miracle that has been the United States was not produced by socialized enterprises, by government and union industry cartels, or by centralized economic planning. It was produced by private enterprises in a profit and loss system. Further, losses are important in weeding out failures, just as profits are crucial in fostering successes. Let government secure failures, and we shall be headed for stagnation and decline. These specific quotes were chosen by me because they tie directly to several of the articles that I wrote within the last 30 days, including Fraud on Homes Expanded, Wheel of Fraud, Benefits of Eliminating Property Taxes in Favor of a Uniform States Sales Tax, and You Can Believe the Math or the Politicians, but Not Both. A list of the links to those articles are at the bottom of this article. The most important point within these documents is the economic damage done by the intentional equity stripping of mom and pop to cover the debts created at the hands of the Federal Reserve and the local taxing entities which own the central appraisal districts and which debts are impossible to pay back. Now, let's break it down. Why does printing money cause inflation? If the money supply increases faster than output, all else being equal, then inflation will occur. If a government prints extra money, households will have more cash and more money to spend on goods. But if the amount of goods stays the same, the extra cash will just cause firms to increase prices. Inflation is caused by too much money chasing after too few goods. That was a quote by Milton Friedman. Suppose the economy produces 1,000 units of output. Suppose the money supply, that's the number of notes and coins, is $10,000. This means that the average price of the output produced will be 10,000 divided by 1,000, which equals $10. Suppose then the government prints an extra $5,000 of notes, creating a total money supply of $15,000. But the output of the economy stays at 1,000 units. Effectively, we have more cash, but the number of goods is the same. Because people have more cash, they are willing to spend more money to buy the goods in the economy. All else being equal, ceteris paribus, the price of 1,000 units will increase to $15. That's 15,000 divided by 1,000. The price is increased, but the quantity of output stays the same. People are not better off, and the value of money has decreased. As an example, a $10 note buys fewer goods than previously. Therefore, if the money supply is increased, but the output stays the same, everything will just become more expensive. The increase in national income will be purely monetary, being nominal. If output increases by 5% and the money supply increases by 7%, then inflation will be roughly 2%. The quantity theory of money. The quantity theory of money seeks to establish this connection with the formula MV equals PY, where M equals the money supply, V equals the velocity of circulation, how many times the money changes hands, P equals the average price level, Y equals the volume, the number of transactions of goods and services. If we assume V and Y are constant in the short term, then increasing the money supply will lead to an increase in the price level. Printing money and devaluation. If a country prints money and causes inflation, then all else being equal, the currency will devalue against other currencies. Based on economics of inflation, the inflation in Germany of 1922 to 1923 caused the German Deutsche Mark to devalue against currencies that didn't have inflation. The reason is that with the German currency buying fewer goods, this meant that the citizens needed more German D-marks to buy the same quantity of U.S. goods. At the apex of the hyperinflationary cycle in November 1923, 4.2 trillion German marks were worth the same as $1 American dollar. Clearly, the psychological and economic damage this has done is unfathomable. Yes, this has happened before. In the U.S. Confederacy of 1861 to 1864, during the Civil War, the Confederacy printed more paper money. In May of 1861, they printed $20 million in notes. By the end of 1864, just 3 years later, the amount of notes printed had increased to $1 billion. It caused an inflation rate of 700% by April of 1864. By the end of the Civil War, the inflation rate was hitting over 5,000% as people lost confidence in the currency. In Germany, 1922 through 1923, in 21, $1 was worth 90 marks. By November 1923, the US dollar was worth 4.2 trillion German marks, reflecting the hyperinflation and loss in value of the German currency. Hungary, just after World War II, 1945 to 1946, prices doubled every 15 hours. Zimbabwe, 2008, prices doubled every day. Yugoslavia, in the 1992 to 1994 inflationary period, hit 64% equivalent daily inflation. Greece, 1944, 18% inflation daily. Argentina, 1991, 3,000% annually, once one of the wealthiest countries in history. Argentina, May 12, 2023, 108% year on year. 2018 foreign debt obligations became unsustainable and the peso collapsed against the US dollar. Russian ruble, March 1992, 3.7% daily inflation. Brazil, 1985 through 1994, 82% per month. China, June 1945, 302%, then in October 1947, 5,070% peak per month. Venezuela, 2014, 69%. The bottom line is that printing money, which causes inflation, is an illegal tax and reduces the value of money, causing prices to increase. No one knows the extent of the potential damages here in the United States or globally. However, it is abundantly clear that the debts need to be walked down and the size of the government shrunk massively, or the market may wake up one day and make the decision for the rest of the world. Think of it this way. It is the difference of controlled demolition, where some value, let's say 40 cents on the dollar, is achievable, or complete implosion, where the economic value is de minimis and one can make the argument less than zero due to the associated liabilities. Hyperinflation increases stock market prices, wipes out the purchasing power of private and public savings, distorts the economy in favor of hoarding of real assets, causes the monetary base, that's hard currency, to flee the country, and makes the afflicted area cursed to investment. Money supply. The money supply is the amount of money in circulation. This includes notes, coins, and bank deposits. If the government printed more money, then there would be an increase in cash in the economy. Households would have more money, and so their demand for goods and services would rise. With more cash, we wish to buy more goods. However, if the amount of goods for sale remained the same, then the firms would see a big rise in demand for this limited supply, and so the firms would respond to higher demand by increased prices. Therefore, increasing the money supply faster than the growth in real output will cause inflation. The reason is there is more money chasing the same number of goods. Therefore, the increase in monetary demand causes the firms to put prices up. An increase in the money supply causes higher aggregate demand, that's the AD line, as this leads to an increase in the price level. In the man-made COVID period of 2020, there was a self-induced sharp fall in economic activity. The Federal Reserve responded by creating more money electronically. 12 to 24 months later, this led to higher inflation. It is important to note that some of this inflation was also caused by other factors such as rising oil prices and supply chain issues, but the vast majority of the issues and the following governmental expenses are burdens, all of which result in the governmental interference in normal commerce, which resulted in the printing of currency, which resulted in inflation. Increasing the money supply doesn't reduce interest rates any further. In normal economic circumstances, if the money supply grows faster than real output, it will cause inflation. Question: how does one obtain real economic output when one is locked down based on governmental mandates, and how could 23,000 employees at the Federal Reserve not know this? In a depressed economy, this correlation breaks down because of a fall in the velocity of money, that's money in circulation, and banks wishing to hold more reserves. This occurred in the United States and the UK between 2008 and 2014. However, when the economy recovers and the velocity of money in circulation rises, increased money supply is likely to cause inflation. Quantitative easing was a policy by central banks to increase the money supply, which in 2008 and 2009 led to a massive increase in the money supply. The Federal Reserve created money to buy bonds from commercial banks. Banks saw a rise in their reserves. However, commercial banks didn't lend the money out. They chose to send the money back to the Treasury in the reverse repo to obtain interest paid thereon and keep the appearance of bank stability. Therefore, the growth of the broader money supply, M2, didn't change much. What happened is that between 2009 and 2015, commercial banks didn't want to lend the extra money. They wanted to increase their cash reserves. Many banks had lost money in the credit crunch and needed to take in more cash to improve the appearance of their balance sheet. Their confidence and borrower confidence were very low. In 2022, the U.S. started to see inflation. In 2022, inflation was due to a few factors: increase in the money supply in 2020, expansionary fiscal policy and recovery from 2021, that was the COVID slowdown, and the rise in oil and energy prices. During the pandemic, when generous stimulus checks met limited consumption possibilities, Americans had saved more money than ever before, with the personal savings rate peaking at 32% in April 2020 and remaining above the pre-pandemic trend until the end of 2021. That's when inflation started to bite, and people started utilizing these excess savings to support their spending. According to the calculations made by the economists at the San Francisco Fed, American households had accumulated $2.1 trillion in excess savings between March of 2020 and August of 2021. That is, they saved $2.1 trillion more than they would have been expected to based on the pre-pandemic trend of personal savings. In September of 2021, people began saving less than they would have been expected to, meaning those excess savings were gradually drawn down. 3 inflation-plagued years later, Americans have burned through those excess savings, and then some. At the end of September 2024, Americans had collectively and allegedly saved $291 billion less since March 2020 than they would have been projected to had the pandemic never have happened. Isn't it interesting that Americans ran out of money while at the same time, both on the federal level and the local taxing entity level, bond debts have reached the impossibility of being able to be paid off, being roughly $1.1 million and $230,000 respectively, created by the irresponsible, criminal behavior of both levels of government. On November 7, 2024, the Fed lowered the federal funds rate by 25 basis points to a range of 4.5% to 4.75%. This second consecutive rate cut followed a larger half-point reduction in September, continuing the efforts to keep the U.S. economy, quote, expansion on a, quote, solid footing. In its press release, the Fed highlighted that, quote, this further recalibration of its policy stance will help maintain the strength of the economy and the labor market and will continue to enable further progress on inflation as it moves towards a more neutral stance over time, end quote. It goes on. Regarding the impact of a new administration on monetary policy, Powell stated, quote, we don't know what the timing of the substance of any policy changes will be. We therefore don't know what the effects on the economy would be, specifically whether and to what extent those policies would matter for the achievement of our goal variables, maximum employment and price stability. The Federal Open Market Committee stated that it continues to see the risk to achieving its employment and inflation goals as, quote, roughly balanced. The committee slightly adjusted its language regarding the job market as well. Since earlier in the year, labor market conditions have generally eased and the unemployment rate has risen but remains low. The Fed statement said, Powell described the labor market as solid. Regarding quantitative tightening, the Fed's process of allowing bondholders to roll off its balance sheet without fully replacing them, Powell added during the press conference, quote, we are not considering stopping the runoff just because the Fed is now cutting rates. Powell emphasized that he will wait and see what the data says to determine if the 4 rate cuts expected in 2025 are supported by the economic indicators. Powell's opening remarks indicated that his sentiment in the prepared comments was essentially unchanged from the September meeting. However, the FOMC minutes may reveal more of a nuanced view. In summary of the highlighted section in yellow, which I just read, my disdain for the Federal Reserve grows deeper as I am writing this article. Their data, just like the Central Appraisal District's data, is the ultimate definition of garbage in and garbage out. The Fed and the U.S. banks believe, by intent, they have all this figured out. However, they do not control the world markets, and other countries are going to try and keep their own economies stable and are growing, and the same can be said for other countries' currencies. Printing money is not the solution. It is the problem. Main Street, mom and pop, is completely disconnected from the Federal Reserve, which was created in 1913 to backstop the banks from further bank runs, and why the Federal Reserve is reactionary versus proactive and only looking after the banks with willful disregard for the equity stripping of mom and pop. The Federal Reserve is not now and never has been there for the benefit of mom and pop. It has not now or ever been on the right side of a decision. The Federal Reserve is a verbal contortionist, being both the creator of inflation, which is an illegal tax, and the entity more responsible than any other for the lion's share of debt which mom and pop can never pay back, and of which mom and pop are not the implicit guarantor. Due to the fact that the Fed has effectively boxed itself into a corner of debts which cannot be paid back, See the loan amortization schedule of the U.S. debt and loan amortization, Fed and local. There is a very high probability that it will print money in order to keep the illusion of stability in their mind going. 1929 was the year of the stock market crash. The Great Depression, which followed, lasted till the beginning of World War II in 1939. The causes of the Great Depression, including slowing consumer demand, mounting consumer debt, decreased industrial production, and the rapid expansion of the U.S. stock market. In October 1929, it triggered a crisis in the international economy, which was linked via the gold standard. A rash of bank failures followed in 1930. Unemployment topped 20% by 1933. It took the manufacturing production increases of World War II to end the Great Depression. Look closely at the above chart and the prior paragraph. Do you see the correlation? Will history repeat itself? Most economists fashion their speeches to provide cover for those who employ them. The presentations are designed to help politicians mislead the public in their quest for control of the narrative, be it nationally or internationally. Under normal business principles and moral principles as outlined in the U.S. Constitution, all citizens should be able to achieve a level of prosperity, security, and pursuit of happiness, as this is also written in the Declaration of Independence. This should be taught in schools. Poverty begets poverty, and people become enslaved to corruption because they don't understand the very reasons that have been forced upon them in a corrupt system. Debt in the wrong hands is a weapon of mass destruction, and debt created via the Fed, via printing, to cover the scheme is a weapon used against mom and pop and used to enslave the citizens and make them dependent on government handouts. It is a perverse fact that mom and pop is the economic engine that is being used to fuel a corrupt system that takes their money only for that money to be redeployed and leveraged up to pay for the pet projects of the governments that have no bearing or benefit on the daily lives of the citizens who are paying for the money printing in the first place. The Fed has made itself irrelevant and is the largest contributing culprit of inflation. The doors should be changed shut immediately. The United States, as well as any other governments, have a lot of work to do to get their credibility back, and that means walking down the debts. These are called debt workouts, and eliminating the largest source of these debts. Let's just print money, counterfeit some more money, which is the Federal Reserve mantra. If I had my way, the doors would be chained, every computer walked out to the parking lot where a giant crusher would be waiting to take care of business, and all security clearances turned off immediately. As mentioned in multiple videos, there will be pain. However, saving what can be saved and mitigating the losses is much better than letting the market self-destruct because of the debt which is impossible to pay back. Part of that cleansing and pain will be the shutdown of many banks that would not exist but for the actions of the Fed and the reverse repo market. It is important to remind the reader that you, as a single-family owner, owe roughly $1.1 million as a result of the Federal Reserve, and as if that is not enough, you owe another $230,000 as a result of your local school district, and in combination that would mean you must earn roughly another $9,000 per month effective today and payable monthly for the next 25 years, assuming interest rates at 6.25% and assuming both federal and local governments stop spending money today. And under either scenario, that's impossible. And that is exactly why the Federal Reserve and the central appraisal districts must be shut down now. The Rule of 72 means that the Fed will effectively double the federal debt in the next 5 to 7 years. Chain the doors. The true economists are mom and pop because they live it and they don't preach it. A goal of this article is to help mom and pop realize they are their own economists and not to rely on the media, politicians, Fed, or any of their flunkies who dribble out complete nonsense, as is seen in the section highlighted in yellow above. In addition to its creation in 1913, following a series of bank runs, the net result has been that the Federal Reserve violates and stymies the very tenets of competition, which is a requirement for all business. The Federal Reserve and its mirrored minions, such as the New York Fed and the International Monetary Fund, are pure propagandists. which have morphed into pushing agendas such as gender, race, and inequality, thus pushing a false narrative for purposes of control. The vast majority of Fed board governors are Democrats. These ideologies failed at the ballot box, and rightfully so, but that does not mean that the minions won't try again under the cloak of darkness. Chain the doors. Now that we have exposed the actual cost of the debt created at the hands of the Federal Reserve, that's the U.S. national debt plus the unfunded liabilities in excess of $163 trillion, and as was asked on the video, can anyone of the 23,000 employees at the Federal Reserve, or any politician for that matter, please give me, or us, the math on how these debts can be paid off, given the printing of money to pay the debts, which requires larger incomes comprised of more paper currency, which buys less goods. They can't and they won't, and in addition, they will not engage in conversation because it would prove the fraud on the American public. Just like the vast majority of central appraisal districts in the U.S., including Denton Central Appraisal District, the Federal Reserve is an unlawful government agency. Printing money not backed by assets is counterfeiting. Chain the doors. If the Federal Reserve and central appraisal districts were lawful, then why not engage in debates? I've offered to debate the chief appraiser and 15 of the best orators they have. Same for Glenn Hagar, the Texas State Comptroller. Same for Senator Betancourt, including all 31 members of the Texas Finance Committee. And I even said I would be happy to buy the cappuccinos. To me, it is more important to expose the depth of the economic issue as compared to picking on individuals. Knowledge is the key to understanding and fixing the problem. If an individual in government understands the depth of the problem and is told that laws are being broken and chooses to do nothing about it, well, there are laws to deal with that issue, which are the Texas Penal Code 37.11 and Title 42 of the U.S. Code 1986, being knowledge of a wrongful act and power to prevent. The quotes by Milton Friedman, plus the evidence, plus the quote by Thomas Jefferson, is the irrefutable proof that Milton Friedman and Thomas Jefferson are both correct, and those who choose to muddy the waters by omission, thus deluding the public, are intentionally wrong, and more than likely because their income is derived from income tax receipts on the backs of mom and pop's labor, which is paid to the various government entities that employ the vast majority of the economists. Milton Friedman did not live long enough to see the economic destruction, that's the U.S. national debt plus the unfunded liabilities, created at the hands of the Federal Reserve, or the fraudulent debts created by the taxing entities which own the school districts, neither one of which can be paid back by mom and pop, who are the economic engine of the United States and whose asset, the land beneath their property, has been stripped, even though no states claim ownership of the land via a ground lease and no real estate taxpayer signed a consensual agreement to have a ground lease or be a ground leasee. Thomas Jefferson's quote, "I sincerely believe that the principle of spending money to be paid in posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale." There are approximately 23,000 employees at the Federal Reserve. As far as I know, the documentation that my accountant and I have broken down to the mom and pop level has never been presented by anyone else, and part of that is because nobody has bothered to understand to tackle the criminal behavior and use the math to prove why the behavior is criminal. The 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution specifically prohibits taxation of unrealized gains. Market value is taxation of an unrealized gain. The federal government has not woken up to the fact that the federal tax receipts would be higher but for the overvaluation and overtaxation at the hands of the central appraisal districts and their owners being the taxing entities, of which the schools are roughly 83% liable for the bond debts. Under the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution ratified in 1788, Article 6, Clause 2, the law of the land, the U.S. Constitution, takes priority over any conflicting state laws. It provides that state courts are bound by, and state constitutions subordinate to, the supreme law, the U.S. Constitution. Tax liens and tax deeds. If the above discussion revolving around the Federal Reserve does not make your blood boil, then perhaps this short discussion on tax deed and tax liens at the local level will. There's an entire low-life industry created around helping the taxing entities steal your money, including taking your home for alleged non-payment of real estate taxes, which are fraudulently created by the overvaluation and overtaxation at the Central Appraisal District via the tax liens and tax deeds. A property tax is any tax levied on a piece of real property. Taxes are assessed by the municipal government in which the property is located and paid by the owners of the real estate. There is an implied understanding, implied being in quotations, that owners of real estate property are responsible for paying property tax assessments. A tax deed grants ownership of a property to a government body when the owner fails to pay the associated property tax. Tax deeds are sold to the highest bidder at auction for a minimum bid of the outstanding taxes plus interest and that cost associated with the sale. Successful bidders have a minimum amount of time to pay for the purchase, usually 48 to 72 hours. At the close of the auction, the county receives the total delinquent taxes and the former owner receives the net proceeds after taxes and penalties. Property owners may file a claim to receive the amount paid to the municipality in excess of the property taxes plus interest. Tax liens are similar to tax deeds with some subtle differences. While tax deeds transfer ownership of the property itself to a new party, tax liens are a legal claim against the property when the taxes aren't paid. Tax liens provide a relatively cheap investment for investors with a guaranteed return. Liens can cost anywhere from a few hundred to a few $1,000s and pay simple interest that accrues on a monthly basis. The lien process begins when a government body places a lien against the property if the owner defaults on their property taxes. Our evidence clearly shows that real estate taxes are illegal to begin with. These liens prevent owners from doing anything with the property, including refinancing or selling it. Interested parties can invest in these tax liens by bidding for them. The return is based on a maximum rate of interest allowed by the municipality. When a property owner defaults on their property taxes, the municipality sends a notice advising them of the upcoming tax lien. If the owner doesn't bring the tax payments up to date, then the tax lien gets put up for auction. The lien is then transferred to the highest bidder, who pays the outstanding tax amount to the municipality. In order to remove the lien, the property owner must pay a new lien owner the outstanding amount plus interest. One must recognize that the property owner could not afford the taxes to begin with, as the values are hyperinflated many times over the Fed stated inflation rate, i.e. up 61% by the CAD as compared to 2.8% Fed inflation rate, and is then caught up in a loop of doom because the property owner would need an attorney to protect that property owner's rights, which that property owner couldn't afford in the first place. The tax deeds and the tax liens are a dirty mechanism to help provide cover to the taxing entities / tax assessor collector so they can say, we're just following the system, without regard to how that system is corrupt to the bone. And of course, those in charge at the taxing entities, tax assessor collector, and central appraisal districts make their living from the theft of taxpayer money. School districts. Omission equals intent to defraud. We have established that properties, single-family homes, across the United States have had values increase since 2019 by fraudulent overvaluation, being approximately $21.25 trillion, which leads to approximately $450 billion in overtaxation. See fraudonhomesexpanded.pdf. Omission is the key word. Isn't it interesting that so far not a single school district will produce a bond schedule, balance sheets with proper notes, or sources and uses, yet the vast majority have their hands out to raise more bond money? Isn't it also interesting that the definition of cost to educate a student as stated by the National Center for Education Statistics is void of the cost of teacher pensions? If a line item as large as the pensions is removed from true calculations, then this is omission by intent, and that intent is to defraud. Now the question is why? How large have these pensions become? Is there a compound cumulative effect? Why is it so difficult to get a sources and uses denoting outstanding pension liabilities from any school district? How many accountants work for the school district? How much is the annual fee for audits? What is the scope of work for an audit of the financial condition of any school in any school district? Isn't it interesting that when the Tarrant Appraisal District recently tried to freeze the property taxes, never mind correcting the prior multiple years valuation fraud, the school districts from within Tarrant County showed up en masse at the TAD and demanded that the property taxes not be frozen but increased or, quote, we are bankrupt. Could it be that the school districts no longer have anything to do with the children and have become a second Social Security fund on the backs of the real estate taxpayers? Taxation without accountability equals fraud and subsequent theft. Natural disasters. On November 12, 2004, I was on the phone at 6:30 p.m. with the captain, his name is Lewis, of a search and rescue team in the mountains of North Carolina. Coincidentally, or as he would say, by divine intervention, he had seen several of the real estate tax videos that Travis Spencer and I did prior to the hurricane. Now, after this natural disaster, the real estate taxes are being demanded, even though roughly thousands of people may be dead or missing, and thousands don't have houses anymore. And what was once a local economy is now non-functional. Pay the tax on top of what you lost. They don't have enough search and rescue teams, which are now just recovery teams made up of citizens, as FEMA is nowhere to be found, and the citizens have to find the bodies and or the remains. No physical body or body parts means no death certificate, and that means no life insurance payment and possible probate, and the government can take whatever the asset was to cover the alleged taxes or other alleged debts. FEMA has the power to condemn the property and offer a pittance of what the property was once worth or in the future may be worth. This is the definition of RICO, just like the real estate tax at the hands of the central appraisal districts. Give us the money or we will take the property. This natural disaster clearly shows one more irrefutable reason why real estate taxes must be eliminated in favor of a uniform state's sales tax. What can we do about this? It is the desire of all civilizations to do better than the previous generation and to provide a foundation for future generations to prosper. For the most part, communities are able to achieve that goal. In finance, it is called positive drift, meaning the market generally, over time, leans positive. This is the good part of community. However, shocks to the system do occur, and as explained herein, and in this specific case, are man-made, self-induced through both intent on the part of the Federal Reserve and those who spend money without concern for the ramifications, and the apathy of the public who do not know the underlying reasons for the potential shocks and believe that someone else will look after the problem for them. The lack of thought on both sides is what causes the shock. It is important to recognize that the banks are in serious trouble, and the debt being the U.S. national debt plus the unfunded liabilities plus the debts created by the local school districts and the resulting fraud created at the central appraisal districts add fuel to the fire in the form of cumulative compounding debt. The nexus between these nefarious organizations is the debt and the method of creating the debt. Then they attempt to hide the fraud by hiding the documentation for the purpose of further pushing the debt payments down the road by either printing more money, which causes more inflation, or raising bonds without full disclosure, and that combination blows the bubble even larger until one day it pops. No one knows for sure what the destruction of the bubble popping will look like or the exact timing. One thing that is for sure is that the drumbeat of ever-increasing fraudulent numbers being presented by multiple government entities. The other is that the market will correct or revert to a more sustainable level, which may end in a revaluation of the US dollar to be backed by commodities, i.e. precious metals, oil, gross domestic product, and real caps on government spending and debt loads. We need to keep in mind that during a crisis, real estate, precious metal, food, cars, and basic needs of life will still exist. Nothing burned down. Panic does no good for anybody. The question of what can still be bought becomes the issue, and how do you buy it? Debt burdens and those invested in the debt will have financial issues which may be large enough to bring down the US dollar, even though at the moment The US dollar is the best deviate on a really bad block of similar acting deviate currencies in other countries. There is no doubt that the more you peel the onion, the more the tears. The debt and debauchery over the generations has now caused an unhealthy plethora of identifiable problems, including Fed funds rate being headed to par with the 10-year Treasury, Fed is the probable mystery buyer overnight using the plunge protection team, banks are at max balance sheet capacity to the point where the Fed authorized a reduction in the bank-held reserves, that's the Tier 1 capital, so that the banks can hold more U.S. Treasuries on their balance sheets, massive inflation, debasing of purchasing power, and other countries across the globe levering up their U.S. Treasuries into their own economies, all of which revolves around the debt market on the federal side, which, when added to the debt created by the local taxing entities, neither one of which is possible of being paid off, but both of which are possible of negotiating an unwind of the debt. Now add to the mix the rule of 72 such that the compounding of the debt doubles the principal in roughly 7 years, and if that's not enough, now add in the continued government spending and then printing to cover up the Ponzi scheme. When bank liquidity locks up as it did in 2007, the uncontrollable unwind will occur because the U.S. government will have lost the trust of the globe and will be in default of its debt. And that is the reason why I'm pounding the table in this series of videos, website, and articles, which is to supply the evidence of why a controlled unwind is necessary to mitigate the damage so that the market does not do it in one giant move, which, if my math is correct, will end up with unemployment near 35% as compared to 25% unemployment in the Great Depression, which lasted from 1929 to 1939. If you can recognize the problem, you can mitigate the problem. Putting your economic house in order is the obvious answer to what we can do. But what does that mean? Don't take on debt that you and your family cannot handle. What if your spouse loses their job? And can the family sustain the hit? Limit debt and limit leverage. Can your family get a return of the investment and get a return on the investment? Think of your 401k, your pension, and your investments. How secure are they? Have at least 3 months cash on hand for an emergency. Have some physical precious metals, and in particular silver, in the order of roughly 5% of your net worth. Do your homework and recognize that a reset of the currencies is a very high probability at some point, and it stays on the table until the fraudulent debts are substantially reduced to the point of being able to be managed. Don't let anybody at any CAD take your rights from you. Find a good attorney that you can afford and stand your ground. Enjoy your life and use this series of videos and articles, letters and discussions at mockingbirdproperties.com/DCAD and take the free course that Travis Spencer wrote on Teachable and help educate others, and if you have the means, help those that just need help. Those who have the privilege to know have a duty to help. That's a quote from Einstein. Summary. Our goal with the videos and my writing is to help mom and pop understand how their money is being stripped, the equity stripping, and that there is a solution. Stop the equity stripping of mom and pop and restore their balance sheet, allowing them to own the land beneath their asset by eliminating the real estate taxes in favor of a uniform state's sales tax.